All right, we are right at 7 o'clock, so I'll call tonight's city council meeting to order. And Karen, can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick.
Here.
Councilmember Valento.
Here.
Councilmember Erickson.
Here.
Councilmember Roberts.
Here.
And Mayor Bain.
Here, I'd like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Council, we have an agenda before you this evening. I will entertain a motion to approve.
Also move. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and our agenda is approved. Our next item this evening is open forum. Open forum is any interested party's opportunity to address council on any topic of your choosing. And Marcus Gibbs. Good evening. If you
Good
could
evening.
State your name and address for the record, please.
Marcus Gibbs, 108 4th Street Southwest, here in Forest Lake.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, thank you all for your time today. Reason I'm here is this coming summer, I'm looking to start running a ice cream truck here in town. That was until I found out that the fee was $200 a week. So let's break down our neighboring communities and what they charge for a peddler's fee. City of Stillwater is $0. $15 background check, $20 a month standard business license. City of Blaine, $300 for the year. City of White Bear Lake, $250 a year. City of Hugo, $25 a year. Stacy is $150 a year, $25 a year for Lindstrom, and Lydon Lakes is $250 over a 6-month period. The reason I stated all these is they are neighboring communities, also cities I would like to do business in this summer. For me to get a license and a fee, pay the peddler's fee for all those cities, and get an on-premise liquor license and off-premise liquor license in this city, it would be just barely more than the $4,400 a year I would have to pay to run an ice cream truck. So I'm asking for an exception to the fee. I believe the peddler's fee is to keep door-to-door salesmen that sell Kirby vacuums in the 80s out of town. Not really for an ice cream truck looking to put smiles on kids' faces and fat guys like me. That's all I have for you today.
Appreciate your humor.
Mhm.
Noted, and I don't know if Patrick.
Yeah,
if
it's
you have-
noted. I think the better approach is to create a license that addresses this, but our ordinance just doesn't have it. So in order to allow this, I think the better tact for us is to create an ordinance that allows this type of use.
Interesting. We can have, so we don't have an agenda item on tonight's
Sure.
meeting for this, but certainly it's part of staff updates. We can have some more discussion and council will have some opportunity to weigh in as well. Appreciate you being here tonight. Appreciate the feedback.
All right, thank
All
you.
right, thank you so much.
You.
Is there anybody else for open forum this evening?
Mayor, I do have Karen Moorhead online. I'm not sure if she wants to talk. She has been moved into the meeting as a participant. So Karen, if you wanted to speak during open forum, go ahead.
Just listening tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Right. With that, we'll close open forum and bring conversation back to council. Council, before you this evening are consent agenda items 6A through 6K. And I would move that council approve the consent agenda. However, I would like to remove item 6B onto a regular agenda. So I would move approving A, C through K.
I'll second.
Second, any other changes before we, okay, excellent. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose?
Madam Mayor, make a motion that we approve item 6B.
Very good. And
I'll
there
second.
is a motion and a second. Item 6B, all those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
I said aye. I need to retract that. I meant to abstain. Nay, and then I'll abstain. You have that? All right, sorry about that. Thank you. I was on autopilot. All right, moving on to our regular agenda item 7A, resolution 327-2301, a donation of $1,000 to the fire department. And Al, walk us through this.
Mayor, members of the council, we received a generous donation from RAR Corporation in the amount of $1,000 in memory of retired Forest Lake firefighter Frank Elmquist. Frank served on the fire department for over 30 years, and when he retired, he held the position of chief engineer. It is staff's recommendation to accept this donation with gratitude.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you to RAR Corporation for the generous donation. With that, I would move with gratitude that we approve Resolution 327-2301. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose, and motion carries. Our next item this evening, Resolution 327-2302, accepting donations for our Spring Spectacular event. And Abby.
Thank you, Mayor Bay and members of the council. This weekend, we have our Spring Spectacular event, kind of a kickoff to spring and events that'll happen in the city over the next couple weeks. Several local businesses have contributed not only financially, but in kind to the event. Norhart Management LLC, $250, Ungerman Construction Company, $250, Artisan Floors, $50 gift card,
Yeah.
and in-kind
Excited.
Hoff Real Estate in kind, Spike and Hools in kind.
Quite a unique individual. Also, and I think when they talk, they think I'm talking to them.
Staff is recommending the council accept the donation with gratitude and move to approve resolution 03272302.
Very good. Thank you, Abby. And I would move that we approve Resolution 327-2302 with gratitude. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, and motion carries. That moves us to consideration of ordinance 722, a zoning text amendment on electronic billboards, and related resolution 327-2303. And there is a public hearing for this. Order of discussion tonight, we'll have Abby introduce the topic. We'll have a quick round of council comments or questions if there are any. We will then open up the public hearing and then bring conversation back to council for final consideration. Just a note, this topic has been a topic of consideration at previous workshop sessions with city council. And so if by chance our conversation seems a bit abbreviated, it would be because it's been pretty thoroughly discussed, but I look forward to hearing what you have to say, Abby.
I thank you, Mayor Bay and members of the council. I agree with you. December of 22, the Planning Commission held a public hearing, and subsequently this body held a public hearing regarding citizen-initiated zoning text amendments pertaining to amendments to the zoning code for billboards. Specifically, Chuck Bolcom was seeking the city's approval of alterations that would allow for electronic billboards of a certain size and a certain distance. The council directed staff to look at a comprehensive billboard ordinance that would not only incorporate electronic billboards, but also look at some long-term changes to our billboard ordinance. Since that time, there's been, as Mayor Bain had said, a few different touch points here with the council and the Planning Commission. The last meeting that the Planning Commission held last week, they did hold a public hearing. And before you tonight is an ordinance for your consideration that encompasses the direction of the City Council and the Planning Commission. Two areas of note: the Planning Commission or the City Council at the last meeting had indicated a distance of billboards between 13 and 1,500 feet. The ordinance has been proposed at 1,300-foot separation distance for billboards, no matter if they're static or electronic. And then lastly, that there'd be some aesthetically pleasing design. Staff has incorporated some standards for those as well. So with all zoning ordinance text amendments, we look to see that they're consistent with the comprehensive plan, that there's no inconsistencies with the zoning code, and there's a general public benefit. Overall, this would help the city support its local economic development goals just by supporting more small local businesses that might have an opportunity on electronic billboards that change more frequently than some of those static billboards that you might see up for several weeks, months. There is no inconsistencies with the zoning code. This ordinance really helps clean up our billboard language. It really helps provide greater clarity, greater understanding, and a very uniform set of principles for all billboards going forward. And then the general public benefit is this would be applicable to any billboard in the community would follow these standards. And overall, there's also a public service requirement that the city and our nonprofit partners might be able to utilize. So tonight, staff and the city or planning commission are recommending the council move to approve ordinance number 722, an ordinance repealing and replacing Title XV, I don't remember what number that is, Land Usage, Chapter 153, Section 209, Billboard Signs, and amending Chapter 153, Section 205, Signs, and then also moving to approve, that was missing in my staff report there, Resolution 3/27/2303, adopting written statement of reasons for denial of the applicant-initiated zoning ordinance text amendment. I just want to note that even though that the denial is occurring, it's really just to formally close that case file because the applicant has been a long ride for the process, along the whole process, and is in support of the city's ordinance that's before you tonight. The council have any questions for me?
Can you just clarify, just a walk through the application that was submitted? Just provide a little bit more detail on why what the denial is, and with the denial, is it expected that there will just be a new application under the new?
Yes, so there wasn't, what the applicant was proposing is an increase in the billboard size, which the council was favorable to. One of the things that they requested was a 2,600-foot buffer distance. So if we did not deny that, we are ready up against our statutory deadline of reviewing applications within 60 or 120 days. If we did not deny that request, the applicant would be eligible. Actually, the code would change to 2,600 instead of the 13 you're looking to see tonight. And then the other change is that instead of an interval rate of every 15 seconds, that display would switch on an electronic billboard, it would switch every 8 seconds. And that's an industry standard that's supported by MnDOT. It's actually a little bit longer than MnDOT. MnDOT, I think, if I remember correctly, way back in the recesses of when we started researching this, I think MnDOT even allows 6 seconds. So this is a little bit less than that or greater than that.
Thank you for that clarification. Council, other questions for Abby before we open up public hearing? Other clarifications needed?
It looked like we incorporated everything, from a size standpoint, right? That's going to mirror industry standard, correct?
Correct.
Understood. With that, there is a planned public hearing this evening. So with that, let's open up the public hearing, and anyone that would like to make comment, please feel free to come forward and do so.
Good evening, Mayor and council persons.
Good evening.
Charles Bolcom, 6297 West Shadow Lake Drive in Lino Lakes. So I'll be very brief. I'm the applicant, and I've enjoyed the process with the Planning Commission and with this group. And I feel like we're going to be in an action mode. So I just wanted to comment on a couple of actions coming out of this based on my signed permit application being approved. So Mayor, one of the things with the request to encase these poles, there will need to be some cooperation with an operator in the city to get that right so that there's a standard in place. And so I've been investigating and working with my engineering firm maybe to help with a recommendation that works for the city, and we serve the public service by making that look better. So that's just a comment. And then the second comment is that if I'm lucky enough to proceed, this digital advertising structure will be ready maybe around June 1. And so between now and then, my other commitment is to work with the city to bring to life the public service piece. And I think, I'm the first operator to do this. I want to work with the city to find out how to put those messages to work week in and week out from the offset. Knowing that you don't have a lot of resources, I'm going to contribute some time and some resources to help you get started with that. And so those are just the two comments. And so my comments are really based on being quite optimistic about a good outcome this evening.
Excellent. Very
Any
good.
questions for
Thank
me?
you. Any questions for the applicant? Thank
Great.
you for being here
Thank
this
you.
evening. Thank you.
Just to say thanks for all your help on this thing, because you're kind of the expert on this, and we really appreciate it.
No, I appreciate that.
Yep.
I've said it before, I'm facilitation from the
Sure.
planning group. This doesn't, I understand this, this is a tough topic, and so I'm grateful and ready to get to work in Forest Lake to do some of these things.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Madam Mayor, I'm assuming we need
Actually,
two
is there
separate.
anybody else that's?
Oh, I'm
we still
sorry,
have the-
yeah.
That as well. Is there anyone else that would like to speak as part of the public hearing? With that, not seeing anyone come forward, we'll close public hearing and bring conversation back to council. Go ahead, Councilmember Husnick.
I was just wondering, we probably need two separate
That is correct.
Separate actions
Actions, yeah.
indicated this evening. Any further discussion, questions, Councilmember Robert?
So I brought up this concern when we first discussed this. So this only allows a number of them to be, electronic. What's stopping from kind of this grab bag, like first person in for a permit? Because we're only gonna allow so many, and if it's X amount of feet, is there some concern where we may get in trouble with allowing some but not others when it first opens up?
I have been approached by other billboard owners that it sounds like, so there are a couple other larger billboard players in the industry. It hasn't been any interest in those other people that have reached out to me. Now, that's not to say they may not want to, but I think that they've been, looking to see what happens with the city. There isn't any sort of rush, I don't think, on any other owner's part right now. I don't necessarily think that this is unfairly excluding anyone or giving the original applicant any unfair advantage. It's been a very public process. I have been in communication with other billboard owners as well.
And then remind me, the one that when you're coming, you're going northbound, getting off on Broadway, County Road 2 right at the top of the ramp, there's that one there. Is that eligible to be electronic as well, based on this?
All billboards will be eligible as long as they are not within 1,300 feet of an already established electronic
Okay.
billboard.
That's a pretty intrusive, when you pull into town to see that electric right there. That one's, well, people concerned about the Vegas look, that might be a bit
It is a very large.
in your face. So
one.
I don't know if that conversation at this point, but that is a concern, yes.
I would say nothing's too late, right? So I want to make sure I understand your concern. So going northbound, exiting on Broadway, the billboard that's right, as if you're stopped at that light, it's right in front of you. Abby, is there a mechanism for council to exclude that particular location?
I would probably defer to our legal counsel to answer that question.
Yes, so there's a couple things in the ordinance right now that may or may not make that billboard eligible. Specifically, it has to meet certain lighting requirements. It can't put a certain amount of light off of the property after so many feet. So I'm not sure, based on your description of where it's located, it may not be able to be an electronic billboard because of some of those requirements. And then in addition, we always have the ability to deny something due to a safety issue. So because it still requires a permit, if it were to, it sounds like, be a visual hazard to traffic, or in addition with public safety, if there was some concerns about that, that would be a reason to deny a permit always. And so we could do it in that case as well. Without knowing the specifics and having, say that if that applicant, that property owner was interested in pursuing it, we would need to do some diligence on what the actual impacts are going to be. Absent that, if you wanted to just clearly make sure that that particular location was not eligible, we would need to add some specific language that disqualified that site explicitly. But there are some other things, within the current ordinance that give the council discretion.
I'm looking specifically at the ordinance, and I just wanted to review the public safety aspect of where we would be able to, I will stop scrolling and talk. I'm looking to where in the ordinance we have the ability to deny based on a public safety concern. And maybe, so when I think about that intersection and that particular billboard, that's what I think of, is it's a distraction. It's right because of the size, it's right at a major intersection. And so I'm just looking for where in our language do we indicate that, or is it part of our administrative process because it is part of a permit that we would be able to exclude? Is that what we would look to?
Yes, so there isn't explicit language that says that safety is a reason to deny. That's just always a reason that council has to deny.
Okay, and that would come up then as part of a so that would be flagged as part of or a staff review, or also part of individual council approval as a future application would come forward.
Right.
Am I understanding that right?
There would just be discretion, and then based on whatever information was gathered, if it's deemed to be a public safety issue, then that would be a reason to deny the permit. That said, if that discretion is not something you want, and you want it to be just clearly this is not eligible for a electronic billboard, we would want to change the language in this ordinance to make it clear that that particular location is excluded from electronic billboard availability. You know, sometimes you want discretion, and sometimes discretion can be a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how close that thing is already to property lines, because section E5, the minimum setback for billboards shall be twice the billboard's height from all property lines. I mean, I haven't been out there with the tape measure, but it might already be within that, so it wouldn't be eligible for modification.
Correct. In addition, so there's that possibility. There's also the possibility, just based on the light from that would be emitted.
There's another part of this on F5. It just talks a little bit about the light there. It says she'll be equipped and operated with an ambient light monitor, a mechanism that automatically adjusts the brightness level of the sign in response to light conditions. I would assume that at night, the light level goes down.
That is correct.
And then there's F8 that has a maximum brightness that it's allowed to emit.
Yeah.
I just brought it up as, one of those, it's a different, it's just almost like the one that's up, just north of here. It's right on a main street, just different than being, because you really can't see that billboard from the freeway. I mean, it really is just specifically for coming into Forest Lake so.
For that reason, there may be a market dynamic that may keep that as being less attractive to make that type of an investment for that exact reason. But I appreciate the question, because I do think it is a pause point. It's, as these, I think I personally am comfortable with a council discretion being able to look to like an administrative action that we would deny based on public safety. Certainly, if there's a concern that we should hold tonight and get that specifically written in, I'm happy to entertain that as well.
I mean, if that's an option, if that is an option that we look at that one specifically based on public safety or whatever, I'm fine with. The other question I have too is, we're approving this, but not really setting guidelines, or potentially approving this, but not setting guidelines on the aesthetic piece of it. Like,
We do have guidelines. Let me just get to those very specifically. I was moved around a little bit. So the guidelines would be that the support columns would be concealed by materials that are primarily stone, brick, approved masonry or stucco panels or similar materials. So that's a guideline of the materials themselves. All updated billboard concealments should be uniform shape, uniform color scheme and design. So I do imagine the first one is going to set the tone for the others to follow. And then billboards would have the sign bearing the words Forest Lake placed near the top of the support structure. There isn't a lot of guidance there necessarily, but again, that first billboard concealment is going to set that standard for the rest.
The pressure's on the planning commission, Blake.
Yeah, that's right.
Are not actually, the city doesn't approve these. The city planning commission does not approve them. It is an administrative permit, so. But we will work with the first and subsequent applicants to ensure that it is a nice, appealing, aesthetically pleasing design for the community.
Great questions and conversation. Other topics that come to mind that council should consider?
These sign ordinances can be the most complicated thing I've ever worked on, and for 30 years we've been doing this for the city. And so how do you come up with a perfect ordinance?
It is to that point, on typical digital signs now, I think that's a 15-second requirement. Is there some conversation or ability to look at that as to make that the same as what the billboards are?
Those weren't proposed to be changed because generally you're driving at a lower speed with those, and you don't want that more frequent interval because then you can have that distraction, whereas on the highway, that, you know, slightly quicker change, you're driving at a faster speed. We haven't opened up the can of worms of looking at all dynamic signage. We will look at that as we update our zoning code. I'd say I'd probably be kicking the can of the sign code updates into 2024 probably. That is, as Councilmember Husnick had pointed out, those are hard ordinance can be hard and difficult ordinance updates to do, but I hadn't intended to do that at this time.
Any other questions? All right, if we're ready, happy to entertain. It looks like we're looking for two motions tonight. First would be on the ordinance 722, and the second would be on the resolution. Anybody ready?
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 722, an ordinance repealing and replacing Title 15, Land Usage, Chapter 153, Section 209, Billboard Signs, and amending Chapter 153, Section 205, Signs.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? And motion carries. And then second would be the resolution.
I'll move to resolution number 0327-2303, adopting the written statement of reasons for denial of an applicant-initiated zoning ordinance text amendment pertaining to billboards.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? And motion carries. Thank you for being here. All right, with that, we will move on to item 7D, which is ordinance 723, which is fee schedule amendment for certain EDA application fees. And Abby.
Thank you. As the council is aware, the staff has been in discussion with local development firm about downtown redevelopment. As part of the project, they have advised they'd like to seek public financial assistance. While we have processed applications of this nature in the past, we don't actually have anything in our fee schedule related to these types of applications. So staff is proposing an amendment to the fee schedule, which would incorporate a fee and escrow for public financial assistance applications. So this would be TIF, tax abatement type of applications. Staff is proposing a $1,000 application fee that would help offset the city resources needed to process the request. So that'd be more than anything, my staff time, maybe some hard publication costs, those sorts of things. Staff is also proposing a $15,000 escrow. And again, escrow is kind of that debit account. It's monies held here that we can use to pay or offset some of those hard costs that we might have with consulting firms, legal firm fees, that sort of thing. So you should discuss the fee schedule amendment, and if the council's favorable, move to approve ordinance 723, an ordinance amending Title 3, Chapter 35 of City Code and the city's fee schedule by incorporating public financial assistance application fees and escrows.
Thank you, Abby. Council, conversations are to be had. Thoughts, questions, feedback?
Curious, these fee schedules, is this in alignment with other similar like cities?
It is. So a lot of the communities that we looked at, they range, right? So some are as low as like $5,000, some are as high as $20,000. Area cities, that $10,000 range is pretty standard. In talking with Kevin, it's like the Nopnik, you know, is the K silent? I don't remember. Sorry. This is public meetings. You get put on the spot with the weirdest things sometimes. We've been thinking, though, that in terms of the projects that are going to come forth and the emphasis on downtown redevelopment in the next probably 10 to 20 years, that generally redevelopment projects are going to end up needing some sort of a blight analysis if they involve existing structures. Once we start to pull in firms that have to do structural analysis, those fees are just naturally increased. In discussions with Ehlers and Kennedy and Griven, both of them actually thought that this might be a little conservative and that it is likely that we would utilize that funding fairly quickly on a major redevelopment project.
So if we go beyond those $15,000 costs, is the developer on the hook for more then?
They are, yes. So we do have an agreement that we ask the developer, the party responsible for finances, that if additional funds are needed, the city will request them, that if they don't give us more, that we might have to stop work. So that is a fairly informal agreement, but the idea is to have them put additional funds in. A lot of times, we know what those cost estimates are beforehand. Certainly when we're doing some sort of assessment of a structure or something, we can say, okay, we know already it's going to be 18,000, 5,000, 6,000, do we need additional funds or not? So.
And is it proposed that we will use our standard bill back agreement, like our existing bill back agreement process?
We have the bill back agreement. We are transitioning as a city to an escrow base to just help ensure that we don't end up sitting with a lot of unpaid bills. We're beefing up our existing bill back to kind of say it's a bill back and escrow agreement, that even though we can bill you, we ask that you put down a deposit up front, that we have that escrow funds in holding. And that's the preference, just so that we don't run into a circumstance. Really, if somebody put down an escrow, let's say it's a $5,000 escrow, we spend 10, we ask them for 5 and they get a denial, there's not a lot sometimes to go back and get that money from them, so.
Understand. And part of that process, or maybe just talk to us about the process of the applicant's ability to review those invoices as they come in. Like, what does that cycle look like so that applicants understand how that money is being utilized?
I'll probably defer to our finance director on that.
Yes, I'm Mayor Bain and council members. So the part of that review is when we receive these escrows to make sure that we earmark that money specifically for that development, that the project, excuse me, and who that money was received from. Then when we work with our legal counsel, any other consultants that we need on this, when we're receiving those bills, making sure that they're tracking their time appropriately and label those invoices to those specific projects so we can charge those expenditures correctly to projects. We have a lot of different bill backs and different things going on, so it's really important to track that properly. We review the details. The developers or whoever paid those escrows, our standard practice is when we've had a bill back agreement where we've invoiced them, we send those invoices with that invoice. Now switching more towards this escrow base, when we receive these invoices, they are, we always send those to them as well. So they are open to them to review. Unfortunately, when we receive those bills, if there's like a blight analysis or something done like that, that's our communication up front is important to know. We're doing this blight analysis, we're moving forward with this is a cost. Here's the invoice. At that point, if the work's done, that's the invoice we have to pay that specific consultant. So that's where it's really important to have our escrow agreement and our bill back agreements really beefed up as much as we can so we're all on the same page as we go through the process.
Thank you.
Is it based on hourly rates of some sort? I mean, how do you determine fees as they go along? I mean, you spend a certain amount of time on a certain subject and just pull out a number, or how do you determine that?
If
It's
you don't,
usually-
go ahead.
Being that most of them are either the attorney's fees or the engineering fees, obviously our attorney bills by the hour as our engineer, so you'll see most of those on hourly. If, for example, blight analysis could be a flat amount depending on what the work has to be done, or if it's a appraisal that we have to have done, that's usually a flat amount. So it just depends on what kind of service you're talking about.
As long as everybody knows how that works, that's the important thing. So we can be upfront with it, so.
One thing that comes to mind is, do we have a question if there's a lot of ways of public financial assistance, like that's a broad term. And and maybe I missed the level of detail. Just want to make sure that we're specific enough on what types of projects or what types of public financial assistance would trigger that fee.
So right now, the only thing that's listed in the ordinance is just the actual application. We certainly could change this to be very specific, a tax increment finance application or a tax abatement application. We don't necessarily have those split out. Staff has drafted a single form for those to just help streamline the information that we're getting. But you certainly could alter that in the fee schedule to be more specific if you'd like. Or even put.
Yeah, I don't know if I need that level, personally, as I hear you say that, I don't know if I need that level of specificity, because frankly, I think at the front end going in, when we're looking for that fee, I'm not sure that the applicant knows specifically what that looks like. Is that a, whether it's a tax abatement or whether it's TIF or whatever, that subsidy may take different forms, and so I'm not sure it's helpful to, if as long as it doesn't create confusion over what's going to trigger the application. I think that's my biggest concern.
Yep, no, completely. The one thing to just remind you is that the escrow is a deposit. And so if at the end of everything, the $15,000 is sitting there, that is their money. We give it back to them. So it's not necessarily a fee. So the only fee the city would be taking in is $1,000. And that's really to cover the administrative time that it would take. Because I haven't gone through one of these processes, because we haven't gone through one of these processes, I would say that it's probably a low fee. If you just did an hourly rate of the staff and the hours, but that $15,000 really isn't to cover the city's time in processing. It's really to cover city's hard costs in processing.
To your point, Mayor, I mean, what's going to trigger that $1,000 fee? Is it
Yeah, that, I mean, there's, we get
specifically
all-
when we're pursuing TIF or tax abatement? Is that what's going to trigger that fee?
that was kind of,
That was the intent, and now I can understand because the application form, has a section on city assistance with a grant application. This wouldn't be applicable to the storefront, the commercial incentive program. That's a whole different thing. This is programs that are more of a greater capacity of public financing.
And most of those vehicles for public financing are going to trigger that because they're large and involved, whether it's abatement, whether it's TIF, whether it's other things. I mean, like you said, it's not storefront rehab, it's not the small business, grants that we're giving. Most of those financial assistance are complicated and will take time to go through. So
What
you're
I
going to
want-
trigger
yeah.
most of those.
what I want to make sure that we have the definition, the clarity on is that there's times where, for example, a business will be contemplating a project and will reach out and we provide, maybe as part of their project application, there's some questions around zoning or some questions around engineering, city utilities or something that we're providing some assistance, some guidance on. I don't want that to trigger.
The difference here, this
and
is a pure financing application. This isn't whether it meets zoning requirements, whether it
Financial
meets anything.
assistance,
This
okay.
is financial. This
Okay.
is, we know that when you ask for financial assistance, it's going to take experts that we don't have on staff, Ellers or Kennedy Graven, that we're going to have to pay for. So it's not zoning recommendations. It's not any of that. It's purely when somebody asks for assistance on financing.
That's the specificity I was looking for. Thank you. I drove us down this rabbit hole. What other questions might we have?
Would that, how about assistance through the county deed or anything would that be separate, or is that the
Yeah,
same?
it could be separate. If we can assist through deed, that probably won't take the 15,000. I won't speak, and maybe I'm wrong, but those are, I think, things that the county can help them go through, or deed can help them go through, and that's more, again, on another agency than it is us, but we'll obviously try to walk them through it as best we can. I don't think we'll be into the $15,000 fee on any of those.
But would that still trigger though just the application fee, the $1,000 if
I
there?
think it's wise to memorialize whatever kind of whatever kind of fee you're trying to get in this case. There, we can get you deed or not, or whether we can get you the county, we'll have to, I don't know if that would trigger your fee or not.
To the point on the county application, or to a deed application, typically they'll ask the city to be a sponsor, pass a resolution of support, because they can't have a developer coming in, because sometimes we'll act as a fiscal agent for those funds. So again, it's a level of involvement. If it's something where they already have it drafted and we just have to bring it here for approval, that's probably not going to trigger, in my mind, a full application. If we're just sort of, saying, yes, we approve this application, we're in support of it, versus if they're having us do a lot of the back end sort of calculations to see if it qualifies or not, then that would trigger the application, fee, in my mind, how that would kind of be processed. But a lot of like the deed and state applications are just, they want the city to be the vehicle because they have to go to a public agency. They can't go directly to private. So they use us as the conduit for that. And at that point, we're typically, deed will take a lead on some of those, letting us know what they need. And then the county also, talking with Chris, he's also one that will help get those applications crafted. So it's a lot more, it's not our staff time, it's typically other agency staff time at that point.
In concept, I'm supportive of the structure that's been laid out. We don't do anybody any favors by undershooting what costs are going to be. And so, yes, $15,000 is a lot of money. However, it also plays out with what we know costs to be on these large projects. And so, again, it's that balance of somebody having that money up front and us being transparent about what those projected costs might be. And then it's always a balance on recovery of staff time, and $1,000 on a project, on some of these projects that are of quite a heavy scale, $1,000 is quite modest. Now, I know we have other fees that we are also likely to collect on those projects, but the particular related to the financial piece, that seems like it's a place we don't currently have a mechanism for collection, and $1,000 seems quite modest. So, my perspective. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? All right.
Well, Madam Mayor, I'd make a motion that we adopt ordinance 723, the fee schedule amendment for certain EDA application fees as presented.
I'll second.
The motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and motion carries. All right, moving on to 7E, which is Resolution 327-2304, MnDOT Agency Delegated Contracting Process and the DCP Agreement. Ryan, I believe you're walking us through this.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. In your packet, you have an agency delegated contracting process agreement with updated language to comply with the new federal regulations. Basically, we execute this agreement to allow MnDOT to act as a city agent in accepting federal aid for construction. So last time we used this agreement was the roundabout at Goodview, because there were federal funds involved with that. If we were to even get grants through the state with federal funding, we would need to have this agreement in place too. So just being proactive on it and updating it from our 2018 agreement. So tonight we are requesting the city approve the attached resolution authorizing to enter into the contract and names of proper officers who can execute the agreement.
Thank you, Ryan. Seems straightforward. Any concerns, questions?
Well, it's been used before, and keep our foot in the door for anything.
Absolutely. All right, anybody ready for a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to Resolution 327-2304, moving to adopt the MnDOT Agency Delegated Contracting Process DCP Agreement as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, and motion carries. All right. That ends our action agenda for this evening. We are going to move into a couple of workshop topics, and just a quick note that anything that's discussed in these workshop sessions will be that requires official action will come back before council as part of an action agenda on a future meeting. And with that, let's move into those workshop sessions, our first being on wetland banking. And Abby, I believe you're giving us an update.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Bain, members of the council. In June of 2022, the city council enacted a moratorium, which is a one-year provision to kind of put a pause on wetland banking within the city. It was, the intent was to give us some time to determine whether or not wetland banking is allowed in the zoning code, whether or not we would like it allowed in the zoning code, and if so, where would we like it within the community. At your February 21st workshop, the council heard some background on it, staff was seeking direction from the council. At the time, the council wasn't ready to make a decision on this matter, but had asked for some additional information, specifically pertaining to the history of wetland banking, some of the roles and responsibilities of all the parties, lifespan obligations, and then specifically the council had asked about Fairview Farms, a wetland bank that is within the city limits. So a little bit of a brief, very abbreviated history was included in there. This really started to gain some interest in the 1980s and certainly through the 1990s when the federal government established the no net loss provisions for wetlands. 1994, there was a national study, the Wetland Mitigation Banking Study, that really created banking programs. And in 1994, Bowser, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, created the Minnesota Wetland Banking Program. They've been administering that ever since. So this isn't super new, but it's also not like time-tested practices. You know, I mean, it's been around a number of decades. I'm not going to say how old I am, but might be about the same age as me. That's all I'm saying. When it comes to review and approval, really wetland banking, because it is authorized by the federal government, it's allowed anywhere unless it is outright prohibited in a city's zoning code. In talking with senior wetland specialist Dan Dunier with Bolton and Mink, there are only maybe a couple small communities in the state that have actually banned it, but we don't have any ordinances, no model ordinances. It sounds like there might have been a few mining communities that were very concerned on this as well. Unless the city is a local unit of government, there's nothing that we can say or do that would prohibit where they go, other than by adopting something in the zoning code saying where they can and cannot go. So for example, the city is the local unit of government for the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District. During the review process of a new wetland bank, the city as the LGU can say, well, the city's not sure that this really fits with zoning. Doesn't really matter. If it's not outright prohibited, zoning really doesn't have a say in it, if that makes sense. Or if we don't say you can do it here or there. That makes sense?
Does that mean that you can't, there are no conditions that would allow it? It's either blanket allowed or?
No, I think we could adopt an ordinance that says if allowed, then these conditions, but I'm not, I mean, we're kind of dancing, I think, in newer territory. As I've mentioned, there aren't many communities that have done this. It sounds though that if zoning, if we don't have something and we just said, well, you know, wetland banks can only be this size, there's question of whether or not that the LGU really can, that could deny something. That's all I'm saying. Hopefully that came across what I'm looking for. Good. Long-term impacts, really when it comes to an industry right now, the big players that are creating new wetland banks want high and dry land. So the key right now is really taking former agricultural land, breaking up the drain tile, and turning that into a wetland. When we take this high dry land, we no longer have agricultural land and we no longer have any chance for development because a permanent conservation easement is placed over the wetland bank. So we're taking the land and we're putting it completely permanently into conservation. When it comes to that, the conservation easement is a responsibility that the landowner enters into with other agencies. So the city doesn't have a responsibility in making sure these are maintained or upkept. Bowser does do inspections every 8 to 10 years. They do enforcement, so it wouldn't necessarily put a strain on city resources unless there was a problem the landowner wasn't holding their end of the bargain, you know, there could be some potential impacts to neighborhoods or areas in which they're located in. We'd have to be relying on those outside agencies and organizations, though, to be enforcing the provisions of the conservation easements. The Fairview Farms is a little unknown. It looks like Fairview Farms wetland banks were created as part of on-site mitigation. There are, I was mistaken in my last meeting, there are credits available. They are located in BSA 7, so Bank Service Area 7. That's the Rice Creek District boundary. The credits are still available in Fairview Farms. That was authorized in the early 2000s. There's maybe some speculation on this that maybe there's a market saturation or that the quality of the wetland is low. I'm not exactly sure what the cause is. I don't know if they need a good marketing agent or something. I don't really know necessarily why those credits haven't been sold. In talking with Dan, a couple other things just for consideration. BSA 7, that Bank Service Area 7, that's kind of hits the larger area, the metro region. There are a couple of large developments that are occurring right now that once those banks are certified, there's going to be a greater market saturation. Those are the areas in which there's $100,000 of credit. That cost is going to come down once these larger wetland area banks are created. There are no credits in Banks Area 6, Service Area 6, so that's our Comfort Lake, Forest Lake Watershed District area. So our developers in those areas, if they have impacts to the wetlands and do have to mitigate, they wouldn't be able to buy credits in Bank Service Area 6. They'd probably have to buy them in a different bank, which increases the cost to 2.5 times. That would be the same for any of our transportation projects as well. And then lastly, I did mention in my previous, in our previous discussions that this banking program can be used when somebody takes a degraded wetland and improves the quality, restores it. Dan Denier said, people can do it, they don't. I guess it's a pretty high cost. There's just a lot more involved in it. Now, that's not to say that it's completely impossible, but the wetland bank developers of this world are not interested in doing the land conservation projects, if that makes sense. There's a more time intensive, more resources that it takes to do those. So with all of this said, with the conversations we've been having back into February, just recapping, because the city has a limited amount of control in the review and the approval of wetland banks, because the city is already greater than 35% water, and its impacts to the city's remaining high and dry land, staff would recommend we do not allow wetland banks within the city. I would say that if the council does want to talk about this, my recommendation would only be to allow it in the conservation land for restoration purposes, and that would help us achieve natural resource goals within the community. But just know that there are areas of the community, even in on agricultural lands that might be zoned conservation, where we've been tilling those as farmland for a really long time, but they are wetlands, and improving that wetland could then be eligible if we allowed it for restoration purposes. So I'm here. I know that was a lot of talking with no visual aids, but hopefully you had all read your packets and understand at least the information that I've provided with you in these last couple of meetings, and I'm here to kind of essentially seek direction from you on the drafting of an ordinance based on discussion this evening. But as a reminder, we do need to have that ordinance approved by June 13th to fulfill the obligations of the moratorium. And just as a reminder, electronic billboards started in December, and we just approved it tonight. So just a little hot seat, little fire under you.
Thank you, Abby. Council feedback, thoughts? Actually, before so we have this meeting tonight. Can you just walk through the planned
Sure.
calendar for next events?
The plan has gone a little behind. It was staff's intention to have an ordinance drafted for the Planning Commission's consideration in a public hearing in April. That would be their second meeting in April, though they would have a little bit of time if they wanted to extend it one more meeting into May. City council public hearing would be hopefully May 22nd with the city council's actual action on the 12th. It's tight with the third moratorium because we do have the publication that has to happen later. The council could take action on the 22nd even. We might be able to shore that up a little. But I found with ordinances so far here, the too much I tighten it up, we end up kind of extending the time frame out a little bit. We need more discussion time.
Understood. With that timeline and process in place, should we, questions for Abby, feedback? Thoughts?
I appreciate all the homework that you did. There's a lot of great research I read through the packet. I guess personally, I hesitate to put an outright moratorium on it. Just limiting landowners' use, doesn't appeal to me. Although I can appreciate the challenge. The fact that we don't have any available in our district and we have lots of road work that needs to be done. I mean, it would make sense to have some available. So, I mean, finding that middle ground is, I think, where I'm at.
The middle ground, are you speaking specifically around the Conservancy district, or are you open to even broader than just what's in the Conservancy district?
Maybe broader than that. I mean, there's a concern that we're already at 35% wetland in the city. So, I mean, perhaps we could, do we say we'll allow up to X percent? Is that helpful to get us to where we want to be? Where we're curtailing it, it's not going to be, everything banked willy-nilly, but, there's some limits.
That's going to be tricky. I have not worked in a city or with ordinances that say this is the law until this point. It would take quite a bit of administration, I think. Just looking at legal counsel at the moment, that would be a very uncustomary process. Generally, this is the law until we repeal the law. So we could say up to 40% be water in the city, and I leave, you leave, somebody else leaves, and that just stays on the books forever.
Spitballing, and just thinking about that concern, we would have an opportunity to do something that would sunset, right? That we would say, for example, we would prohibit it, but then maybe do some sort of a sunset that would require council to readdress at a future time. Is that an option that would be on the table for? I don't know why.
I would defer to legal counsel on that one as well.
Thank you, Your Honor. Counsel, you can, but just as what Abby mentioned, staff turnover, council leave, there isn't one meeting in that particular case. This is the code and common law that is sort of ambiguously legitimate or not legitimate, and of course, this creates opportunities for litigation. And Abby's right about the 40%. That would same thing. It's just it creates a lot of.
Understood.
Madam Mayor, one question, Abby. What happens when it goes into Conservancy with the tax base?
The Conservancy zoning district doesn't affect the residential taxes. If it's a wetland bank and that wetland bank has a conservation easement placed over it, then it does inherently have a lower
So
land
it's still
value.
taxable land, is what you're saying?
It is, so a wetland bank is still taxable land, but has an inherently lower tax value because it's not developable land.
Okay.
If it's land that's in a zoning district for Conservancy, that underlying use, like residential or whatever, and again, this is zoning district land, still has taxable value as a residence on the property. It's just our zoning district limits what can and cannot be done there.
Madam Mayor, Brian has a question.
Brian, go ahead.
Mayor, City Council, I just want to point out, basically, one of the major reasons we're here is because there was a project that was coming forward right in your prime developable area. They were looking at 240s, right? So we take those chunks of land out. They're not coming in to do 1 acre or 5 acre. They're coming in, they're going to take a swath of land. They're going to convert that to unbuildable. And that's right where sewer services and everything you guys have planned and ramped up for your comp plan. So if we did allow it, that's what's gonna happen. And you won't have control on what size of a wetland bank they're gonna wanna establish. They're gonna come in and they're gonna do it big and efficient. And these are generally have been some companies that aren't even in Minnesota. So that's kind of just quick synopsis of why we're here tonight.
That Ryan, go ahead.
Ryan, are you saying that the land is more valuable in where we have our infrastructure, more valuable for wetland than it is to be developed?
No, this is what people do for a living. They find land that they can get cheap and convert it into a bank that doesn't have high inventory. They're willing to sit on this stuff because these are big companies. I mean, kind of watching the show Yellowstone, right? When this corporation's coming and trying to develop, they're just that's what's gonna happen here, right? You're gonna be dealing with a bigger company. Yeah, if we develop it, it's gonna be worth way more. But they don't care about that. They're picking projects out of 5 states. And that's what they're gonna move forward with on, that supply and demand game, and that's what they play.
And that's why the strong recommendation of either banning it altogether or putting it in a conservancy district, because like Ryan said, 60 acres, 80 acres, 100 acres of prime developable land. I think that staff is strongly recommending either one of those 2 options, and that we should continue down that road, either a total ban or having these in conservancy only, because you really don't want to start losing 40 to 50 to 60 acres at a shot, because then you start to lose your tax base.
So did I hear correctly? Are we a kind of an outlier? Would be one of the only cities that's done this? Did I misunderstand?
I think we're one of the only cities that are considering this, because we've actually been informed that may happen here. There was a project that we believed would take 60 acres of prime developable land on the south side of the city off prime developable land and make a big wetland bank out of it. Because, as again Ryan said, they're not going to come in and just do 10 acres or 20 acres. The cost to develop it and all that, to make the investment and the return on the investment, you have to go big.
I'm in a position of just personally of open to having my mind changed, but the part that really gives me pause on allowing these is the permanent nature of the property impairment or the land impairment. And there's not much that we do that's permanent here. And if this is really indeed permanent and forever, it's not even like I've said previously, a 30-year building or a 40-year building. It's forever. And so that really just to allow for, given our limited supply to begin with, that forever nature really gives me reason to pause. And also just the lack of control over, this isn't necessary. If the opportunity was a resident looking for a small project that seems like maybe a little bit more palatable, it's the lack of control of, if it's allowed at scale. And that's what gives me some concern. So the opportunity or the inability for us to control size, and then also the concern around the permanency, has me leaning towards supporting a full ban. But again, I remain in a open to change my mind position.
Seems to me that the land would be a lot more valuable left as buildable land than having wetlands dug into it. I don't understand why that isn't the case.
Well, the tax value of wetlands, almost nothing. The value of a wetland developer is the credits that he sells to somebody in the other side of the state or something like that.
But they have to buy this land from somebody to do that.
Yes.
So I'm trying to see the advantage to the landowner, the original landowner, over a development.
Yeah, I would think that can't quote me, but I think that a development of 120 houses would be more valuable land-wise than, it may not be, but then somebody says, I'm going to turn it into wetland, or it's equal.
But that value, I think that's a great question, but that valuation is time-based, right? And that, what is that worth today? And if there is a project that is at the table today that is able to, in this market, sell those credits at $100,000 a credit, that is, immense value versus that, residential build out, given, kind of where utilities are, that might be 10 years down the road. And that inherently, just by the nature of time, gives that banking project a lot of value because it's immediate.
Currently, a landowner is going to know what his or her or their price is going to be per acre. They're not going to deviate much for that, whether it's a house or whether it's a wetland. The thing that we are concerned about is that 60 acres of wetland has no tax base whatsoever. I mean, it's minuscule. There's no value to it. Whereas a 60-acre home development or industrial building has quite a bit more value to it and tax base to it. Again, the landowner is going to sell to whoever's the highest bidder, whether that's a housing development or it's a wetland bank. But it's really long-term, again, that we have so much wetland already. And we struggle with developments that come in that have to work around to put houses around these developments. But the long-term tax base is the real question you should be thinking about, because it's going to be a lot lower of 60 acres of a wetland than it is going to be houses or buildings.
The whole idea is that if you destroy a wetland, you can buy a credit or a couple credits, because it's like 2 to 3 to 1, depending on the quality. To me, that makes no sense at all. I know it happens. I know it does, but when you look at what the amount of wetland we have, and I think it's an asset, really. The natural wetlands are an asset, but you're right, and we still have to work around this stuff all the time. And as far as the credits being worth $100,000, whatever, that's not going to the landowner or to the city. That's going to the guy that's developing it.
Well, and the other point, it's not limited to those developers in town only. It's somebody across the state can buy it here. Somebody, I don't know if they can go interstate or not, but they don't have to be developing in Forest Lake to buy these wetland credits. So you're selling it to somebody who's not in the community and not.
I'm just having trouble seeing the point. Somebody will have to explain it to me, because I don't see it.
A 40-acre wetland, what does that equate to in credits, number of credits? Anybody have
No, I
any
have no
idea?
idea.
It's going to totally come down to the type of wetland rating that they'll be able to establish, but it also goes through a 5-year period before they get officially approved. So it's not an easy process for creating a wetland bank. And it could be totally different what the market is, and by the time they're done and got approval. It has varied so much over the years, it's not even funny.
We limit this to the, was that the Conservancy
Zoning district.
zoning district? I mean, what's the potential out there? I mean, is it, what element of that is high?
Well, my recommendation would be that we allow it only for restoration within the Conservancy district, not new banks. So just as a frame of reference, on the zoning map behind me, the kind of little bit darker green or emeraldy green. Down here, some up here. Also, there's a WMA through there, that it would only be eligible for landowners for restoration for natural resource protection purposes, not that we're creating new banks. The potential is high if we're going to do it from a natural resource conservation standpoint. So we have a lot of wetlands in those areas. I can pull up the zoning map in reference if you'd like and show you. There is a lot of wetland in the community and a lot of wetland in those areas.
And just to answer, I did a quick Google search on your question. And I think it depends, like Ryan said, on the quality of the wetland bank, but it goes up to $100,000 an acre. Which the owner doesn't get, it's the wetland bank people that'll get that.
So to the mayor's point about this being forever, I mean, this really, when you talk about having different public hearings and things, I think this is something that really needs to be advertised as a public hearing and try to move it. I see it being like a month from when that final, I don't know if that's able to be moved up at all, so that this conversation with the public can be more out there and more visible, and people can have that time to comment, because it's make a decision that's forever is kind of, it's a big deal. Like, I don't know, like you said, I don't know how many other ones that the council or city would make that is forever?
Yeah, so it would be codified in the zoning code. The zoning code does require the planning commission to make recommendation to this body. The city code says the planning commission has to hold a public hearing. Additionally, state law requires this body, the city council, to hold a public hearing. So we're kind of doubling up on hearings with these. We enacted the moratorium in June of last year. We've had this on a couple different council agendas thus far. I'm not sure what else you would like us to do, but we can't hold a hearing until we would have an ordinance. And so we're seeking the direction of the ordinance to be able to draft that before we would set those hearings.
I think also to clarify too, just because we're amending the ordinance, that doesn't mean the ordinance isn't forever. So
That is true.
I think what the forever aspect is if there's a wetland bank, that's forever. So, but the ordinance isn't forever, because no law would ever be forever.
Yeah, I go away, you all go away. Another 5 years, somebody says wetland banks are great, they just can repeal the ordinance.
I think Councilmember Roberts brings a great point. And there's, as we've had our conversations and I've learned more about what a wetland bank is, I wonder if there's an opportunity to approach Hannah with Forest Lake Times and do an interview or prompt some article or some publication, some information, just to get information out there on what it is, so we can get some feedback and people have had an opportunity to get some background information. So maybe a specific outreach might be helpful. Again, because
The more the merrier.
yeah, I'm looking for both some support through the education, but then also the support in getting kind of the word out that council is considering this important topic. As them to get some more information or more feedback.
And, as far as my opinion is concerned, I want somebody to convince me otherwise. Show me why I'm wrong about this, or why I feel that way, or why it's wrong on my opinion. So the more the merrier. Let's get the public out there and get their opinion on it and see where it goes from there. And that includes developers too.
The channels, as well, but this is one that maybe just requires a little bit of additional education, additional input.
I can understand, and I think that we can definitely find ways to get more public education out there. Given the time frame that we are in 3 months, less than 3 months, 2.5 months, and I apologize, we had a year. I haven't even been here a year. I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but I should have been more proactive in having these conversations sooner. I would like to, I guess, as we move forward, know if it seems, I heard the council is considering a ban. It's going to be difficult to put public information out there that the city council is considering a ban, and then maybe the 10th hour we say, oh no, we want to go a different direction. And then we're creating an ordinance to allow something. And so a lot of times communities, agencies, organizations have a better time when they can react to something. I can certainly put together an ordinance for eventually your consideration for an outright ban, or in the Conservancy District, or in every zoning district. I just would like to maybe have, I'm not saying a show of hands, I'm not asking for a vote, but that kind of direction from the council that we are heading, that we believe that this is the route we'd want to formally consider.
Well, with that, I will tell you my opinion.
Thank you.
I am fine for an outright ban, but I'm also fine for the middle ground of improving the conservancy for the wetlands there. I think that might be, so both of your recommendations that you give, I am favorable for either of those. I know that's not very helpful, I guess.
No, I appreciate,
but,
I appreciate you making that statement, that it, at least I hear from one person a very strong statement. Now, I understand that may change, right? We're not in any binding situation. It's just moving forward would be difficult without something.
What happens if the moratorium expires? Could you?
We could have an application the very next day for 80, 40, 80, 300 acres of wetland banking.
Also, I would say it's because we're kind of weighing options here. The irreversible decision would be to allow it and to have a project come in. That's irreversible. To do a full ban and then to have council reconsider a full ban at a later date keeps as many options for us on the table. So I throw that out there as an option if we needed to have something in our back pocket. We can reverse course, but we can't reverse course if a project has an application's come in while we've had this window that allows it.
That is correct. Our code allows anyone to make an amendment, a request to amend the zoning code. So just as Mr. Bolcom had come in with an electronic billboard ordinance, that was a citizen-initiated request. We outright ban, let's just say that's the direction. I start preparing ordinances, we have hearings, we say, nope, we're not going to allow them. The very next day, somebody could come in and say, I'd like to petition a zoning ordinance text amendment, and we could reignite that conversation the next day, the next year, that sort of thing.
Yeah, please.
One thing that hasn't been brought up, but I think would be helpful for us as well, is the importance of differentiating wetland banking in terms of wetland clearance that we're going to do outside of the city versus using the wetland mitigation to deal with projects with the. So another way that we have compromise would be we're going to be developed within the city, and we need to do some wetland mitigation for that within the city. Craft the definition such that a wetland bank is not that, right? So a wetland bank is for creating the wetlands that would be for projects outside of the city boundaries versus.
Yes, reading on page 84 of the deck, in that second paragraph, I mean, it talks specifically about that. Is it, I mean, if we are favorable to allowing some wetland banking within the city, we could limit it to either as much as credits within the BSA or even simply, like you're saying, within the city. With that, could we limit that redevelopment to the Conservancy District then?
I don't think you want to, if you're talking about in the city mitigation where we've got, let's just say, for example, 200 homes going in and they're going to relocate the wetland, I don't think you want to limit that to the Conservancy District if that's what you're doing. I think there's a differentiation here that we want development here. We want to give them the opportunity if they have a wetland issue to do whatever they have to do. So we allow some kind of remediation or creation of a wetland in a different spot. I think we need to continue to have that because it's important to development. But I think we also need to ban any outside projects coming in, and that way I think that's a good walk down the middle of the line.
Question, Ryan, so this, obviously, if we're not one of the few that's even considering this, but like with all the municipalities that Bolton Bank works with, or anyone else having these types of conversations, I get we're different in that we're wetter than most, but like, are there anyone else that you know of considering something like this?
Well, Abby was working with Dan, right? So all the information that she was discussing with him, he does work all over the states and even out of the state. So I just think it's if that land that came into play here goes away, we want to continue to develop, all our infrastructure alone has to be expanded from over here. The sewer line is over here. If you want development over here, you got to get that pipe all the way now over here and some lift stations to get there. Everything we've planned in the comp plan, conversations with your future interchange, whether it's there or here, it's that important to reserve that land for this development if you want to meet your density requirements that you guys have set forth. That's the reality. Do you want the land to be developed or do you want it to be wetland? That's what's going to happen. They're coming in or they're not coming in. That's the deal. It's just where we're at with the economy, and that's the land that's still in the price range for purchase because we're not far enough down in the metro. You know, we do have a little slow in the subdivision development world right now because of material supplies and interest rates. So it's prime time for these things to come in right now. Because when development comes back, yes, they're going to need to purchase some credits, but we won't then have the land to develop that we've all identified in the comp plan. And this is that area that's not residential. It's, you know, your other zoning that you guys have come to agreement on. Our growth is here, down that way. There's going to be no growth that way if you look at the wetland maps and all the unbuildable land. It's just not going to happen. For instance, Chestnut Creek, we were supposed to get 3 to 6 units per acre. We were less than 1.5, I think, overall of the final development because of wetlands.
Wasn't resounding feedback.
It's not
Do you-
resounding feedback. I do hear, though, I won't even say a majority. There are several of you who would support an outright ban or the allowance in the Conservancy District for natural resource protection. I do hear that you would like us to do more public outreach, to draw eyes to this, to gauge the input of the public. I can do that as well. I will start drafting an ordinance. It probably won't come back before you until your final hearing, but I'll definitely keep you posted along the way, or until your public hearing, keep you posted along the way of upcoming hearings and discussions with the Planning Commission, other agencies that may, or individuals I might talk with during that process. I have enough direction at the moment, so.
Is there anything I have missed the last couple of planning commission meetings? Has there been any point, I know that when the planning commission, the last conversation I'm aware of, the planning commission was, because at the time, council seemed to be leaning towards supporting an outright ban. I think it was the planning commission that came back and said, actually, we have these conservancy districts, and maybe this is an opportunity for some broader land utilization within that conservancy district. I think that came from the planning commission.
They were favorable to us looking into that.
Okay, and this revisiting, has that come back to them and it has?
No, it was directly from the Planning Commission to this body, and then you asked me to look at the history, the roles, and that sort of thing. So I haven't come back to the Planning Commission. I was going to get the direction from this body before bringing anything back before them.
I think if I could speak for what I've heard so far, I think this body would be really interested in hearing feedback from the Planning Commission. We appreciated their perspective and their, free and feedback. And so I think that getting that check-in would also be helpful.
Yeah, I don't know that that feedback will have changed from them. I mean, their direction to staff was this, we think that Conservancy District, and maybe as part of development, and staff is the one that's now saying, even as part of development, we run a pretty significant risk here. On the Planning Commission, did not seem favorable to allowing it in kind of those high and dry lands, because they are recognizing the value that that does place in for our urban development in the future.
I do really appreciate Ryan's feedback on perspective of just the protection or the potentially negative impact to our current plans, and those current plans are long in place and have had multiple years or multiple versions of our comprehensive plan have kind of supported that expansion and that growth plan. Our city utilities are structured for that, and so something that's a severe disruption to that plan, I really appreciate Ryan's feedback and guidance as to what that impact could be. So thank you, Ryan. Any other points of feedback that we want to provide to Abby as she's worked towards draft ordinance?
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Abby. Next workshop topic this evening is the discussion of an upcoming joint workshop between the EDA and City Council and Patrick.
Yeah, we already had a discussion regarding the application for public financing. What we would like to do is have a special meeting and joint workshop with the EDA on public financing, and not only TIF, but any other types of assistance that is available. We're looking at the 19th, it's a Wednesday. Our April workshop is probably going to be already full with other things that we're bringing to council. We're hoping to start that at 6:30. We will first have both bodies in the same room and talk to them about public financing, explain, the ABCs, the 1, 2, 3s, and answer questions and go with that. But then we're also going to ask the council to go into closed session to talk about a development that may be possible, since we're going to eventually getting into negotiations, whether it's land sale or development or financing. We'd like to get a little bit more closed session information with you regarding a certain development that may be forthcoming, and then answer any questions and any guidance that we may need to get before we go too far down the road on that particular development. So if the council's willing, we will schedule it for the 19th at 6:30. You could schedule it a little earlier if you wish at 6, but it's up to you if you are available that night, and if the EDA is available at that night.
And just a quick point of note as we're looking at calendars. So the April 10th EDA meeting is canceled because we have the Board of Appeals meeting during
Correct.
that same time.
Yes.
And so City Council has a workshop that will be, sounds based on Patrick's feedback, that agenda is quite full. And so the proposal is to do a joint workshop with the EDA on Wednesday, the 19th, in a special meeting.
Fine, I'm okay with it. I don't know, but I can't speak for anybody else.
Calendars,
but I'm
that
okay with it.
works.
That's fine with me.
Excellent.
Just a question on the closed session piece of it, like this, since it's initially not going into like any negotiation, but just more of a policy question, it seems like the more that you're open and transparent to the public, the closed session part would be when negotiations.
It needs to be a closed session. There's going to be some points of, being that there's going to be an application for assistance and a development, there's a lot of moving parts with this as far as negotiating a contract. We've got public land that may have to be transferred. There's a lot of pieces that we need to talk about, and we cannot talk about those in a public session. I advise you not to talk about those in a public session as well. And if Amanda has a different view, that's.
Spoke about this, and the purpose for the closed session is right, policy, that's absolutely all out in public, but because there is a land transaction that is for the potential development of new on city property, that's a negotiation, and that is typically about.
And part of the workshop is to talk general policy with the EDA and with the council. I mean, obviously we need to know where you're coming from. However, each development, no matter what it is, whether it's the one we think it is or it's a future one, is always going to be separate and different and will require different types of conversations.
So in that joint meeting, will that specific development be part of the conversation?
No, it will be pretty general, actually.
Understood. Appreciate the questions about, does it need to be a closed session? As I understand it, the decision to close a session is always a decision of council. And so if somebody is thinking that something should not be a closed session, I would say maybe look at the agenda once that agenda is published or proposed, to kind of look at, is each individual council member comfortable that that is something that should be closed? Because again, that is a council decision. So. Overall, based on what I've heard, though, I support the structure and timing. Looks like calendars work. If you could send a note to EDA, just reminder to them that the 10th is canceled, and maybe I'm behind, maybe this was already discussed at the last EDA that I missed, but making sure that they've got time reserved as well.
So did we actually settle on the 6:30 PM time?
I think 6:30 is
Available
helpful.
whenever. I'm available whenever.
Yeah.
That's kind of our standard workshop time.
It is usually our standard workshop.
okay,
Yeah,
just-
6:30.
We just want to make sure we're all settled on that, so.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, 6:30 on April 19th.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Do we publish, and we publish that as two separate meetings then? Because then there will be a special meeting of council. It's probably two separate meetings.
I'll figure it out. I'm not
Okay.
sure which way we'll publish that yet.
All right, we are at the end of our planned workshop section, and we can go into staff updates. And Karen.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. I don't have any updates, only just a reminder, again, as you already said, that Board of Appeals meeting will be held on April 10th, Monday, April 10th. And it will start at 5:30. EDA meeting is canceled. That would normally have been at that time. So 5:30 upstairs in the community room is when that meeting will begin, and then the council meeting will follow immediately after that.
Thank you, Karen. Again.
Mayor, members of council, I am still waiting to hear if we won the Municipality of the Year award, so I'm still waiting, checking my email every day to seeing if we are a winner of that yet, and I will let everybody know as soon as I find out. And then I also want to update council, as you recall, at the end of last year, council approved a contract with a consultant to update our BSNA portal so we could allow for online building permitting. I met with the consultant today. We are still on track for a end of Q3, beginning of Q4 deployment. So I just touched base with him today to make sure that he has what he needs to get that work completed, and we're still on track for a online permit issuance at the end of Q3, beginning of Q4 of 23. So that's what I have.
Again. Abby.
Mayor Bain, members of the council, I have just a few updates. Some of you might have seen I was able to attend a community manufacturing tour on March 17th with Congressman Stauber. It was really great to not only get to meet him and be a part of the chamber facilitated event, but also just to see there are two pretty great facilities, both at Team Vantage and Norhart. You might have seen some press on Norhart kind of coming out as a result of that. Welcomed this week Dawn Boogie. She is the Community Development Administrative Assistant. She started with us. It's been really great to already have somebody in the seat moving right along, helping just review, keep us in line with these processes and procedures that you hear me saying them, but having somebody there that can help kind of take some of that just little bit of stuff off is really great. Helps me work on some of these ordinance amendments. Tonight you approved some donations for an event that's held here on Saturday from 1 to 4. That's the Spring Spectacular, formerly known as the Spring Fling. We kind of had a couple different spring flings that were happening out in the community, trying to combine this event a little bit more with chamber events. There's games, bouncy houses, arts, crafts, snacks, touch a truck. It hasn't been labeled as touch a truck, but Washington County, our fire, our police, will all be out for kids to be able to climb in and around can't say in and around, not on, but get to be able to be around our fun vehicles. And then lastly, I know we had in the open forum tonight an inquiry about just food vending, and it's kind of come up where are we at with the mobile food vending ordinance. Staff has been working on that. We do have some drafts. There's been just this kind of stuff that comes up, and it makes us kind of look, well, is this fit into this, and how does this work with this? Given we have a fairly big event in the summertime that has food trucks, we do think that it's probably best for us to keep working a little slowly, but have this implemented probably by the fall at the latest. You should be seeing something soon, but know that that's something that there's been a number of other ordinances that have kind of taken precedence to that. So, any questions for me?
It just, then with that said, so for the summer, you're suggesting that it's status quo, there's no real enforcement on food trucks that are permanent in certain locations in the city?
I think it's important to wait till after the 4th of July to put mobile food truck ordinances and regulations in place, because we don't want to mess around with the 4th of July because there's a lot of food trucks there. So we need the time to take that into consideration and mold that ordinance around that so we don't disturb that event as well. But we will, however, internally talk about ice cream trucks tomorrow, so figure out how to change that.
So part of that discussion is there potentially a path for, I don't know, definition, waiver? I hate to hear,
For ice cream trucks?
yeah, I just, yeah, I hate to
It's
hear
always,
an
it's always a
opportunity.
path. We'll figure something
I
out.
hate to hear an opportunity knocking and then saying, it's a great idea, but wait until,
No, we will.
this an entire season.
Yeah, I think there's a more immediate path with that. We'll talk about that tomorrow and see what that might
Understood.
be.
Understood, okay. Thank you. Kevin? I just jumped over an entire row. Let's go our usual order and hold tight. Patrick?
Just a few things. Been pretty much monitoring what's going on at the Capitol with all the bills, and there's been a number of them I'd like to bring to your attention. A few years back, the local government assistance, which is given to cities, the city, Forest Lake lost theirs about 3 years ago because of the formula. There's a bill in both chambers that may change that formula. If it does, and hopefully it will, we're potential to get a $75,000 from the state on that change. That's at least their estimate. So that's good. I think we lost it 3 years ago. Being that we're a growing community, the formula is still screwy, but hopefully we'll get that. Tonight you passed in the consent agenda memorandums of understanding the Juneteenth with all 5 labor unions. There is now a bill in both chambers that may make that retroactive immediately to this year. Being that it's a state observed holiday, we may have to make that change as well. Don't know, we're monitoring that, so. Everybody make it a day off in June still, we don't know that. About a $15,000 impact on the budget though, so we're looking at that. Some of you will remember the Sacred Settlement project that in this
homes.
community wanted to put tiny homes in a church parking lot and have that was not allowed. They had a bill a couple of years ago to allow that because there's building code issues and things like that. That has come back, so there's possibility that may come back to be a law. We're not sure yet, but it has been introduced in both houses. We should not be in favor of that one. That's kind of
Is the bill that's introduced a change to the overall building code, or does it allow for a path for that type of a
I
project?
believe it allows for a path. I haven't read the full bill yet and the analysis yet, but that subject is back up. And then I've been trying to keep up with what the legislature is doing as far as the bonding bills, which is almost impossible because they go back and forth like a ping pong match. I'm not sure if any of our requested projects are in or out, but we look every day with the new laws and the new proposals that come across, and hopefully we'll have more information on if any of the 3 projects that we've requested get funded. That's all. Questions for you? That
Question not related to those, but in your weekly report, you mentioned staff meeting with the folks from Pizza Pub about an extension or expanding the dock.
I had done that. I didn't actually meet personally with them, but I have been in discussions with them.
Okay.
And as well as with the DNR about the opportunities and constraints for dock expansion, public or private land. It comes down to a square foot area of the water space, and there's a cap threshold. And once you go over that cap threshold, you're going to need, the project would need an EAW. So both Pizza Pub's desirable expansion, as well as depending on what kind of facilities we would have in our Lakefront Park facility, both of those likely would trigger a EAW. Pizza Pub has talked though about the potential of adding, I think it was 4 more slips that would not trigger that threshold, which was approved by the city in maybe 2017. But it wasn't permitted by the DNR, and the DNR has said that they would uphold that approval without any additional EAW, but they would have to finalize a permit with the DNR as well. So we do think that there'd be some expansion this year, but not as much as that private landowner would desire.
EAW.
Environmental assessment worksheet. So it is an assessment on the impacts to the environment that facility would have.
And is it the expected outcome of that makes that prohibitive, or is it the cost of doing the assessment, or
Yes.
both, or?
Yeah, so it's an environmental assessment worksheet is actually, it's a city thing where we are the responsible government unit, or we can work with the DNR and they could be the responsible government unit, that we assess the impacts to determine whether or not environmental impact statement is needed. The whole idea is that you want that there's no impact to the environment by the activities that are going to be incurred. That would require, again, an escrow deposit that we do have in our fee schedule, that then the city would hire a third party that actually does these, because we don't have the skills or expertise to do them. To do that assessment, it gets submitted to the Environmental Quality Board, EQB, Environmental Quality Board, yeah. Who knows it? I see a lot of eyes looking at me. EQB, there's a 30-day comment period. Once all those comments come in, then the city actually has to respond to those comments, and then there's a formal findings of whether or not there'd be an impact. If there is an impact, then that triggers a full-blown EIS. So there's just part of the environmental review processes before the local jurisdiction, so the city or the DNR could actually approve something like another dock expansion at that facility. So, but they'll get to do 4 more this year. It sounds like the owner is going to be doing that. If the DNR issues that permit, then.
One other question, somewhat related. The study, update on the study for the lakefront and where that lies based on the donation that's been proposed by the Lake Association.
I spoke with Bruce last week. He's finalizing an updated drawing for the proposed dock. It's taking what the Lake Association originally sort of submitted, that U-shaped dock, and reconfiguring it for a more user-friendly experience. Once they get that draft, we'll get it over to DNR for them to review. But it looks like that's still on track for, what we can do to get that accepted as soon as possible. He also has spoken with the Lake Association and let them know that he was going to kind of get their feedback and reconfigure it. So the Lake Association is in the loop as well on this. So he's working right now just to kind of finalize that updated drawing, and we'll get me copies of that as soon as that's available. Then we'll get that reviewed, and if DNR has no issues with it, we'll look at what the total cost is and look at installation as soon as possible for that dock.
And then there's some opportunities to finish the project out on the city side as far as the additional money that would be needed for what they're proposing.
In terms of the dock, like,
Yeah,
at this point, I don't know what the total cost is going to be yet. I know I'm still waiting to see what Bruce's updated model will be, because he's looking at trying to configure the existing dock that's there and adding on these new sort of wings off the side that create the stalls. But until I get the final drawing, I won't know what those costs are from a.
Yeah, we'll have to come back to council, because it's not going, the donation won't be enough to cover what's going to be done. So we'll have to go back and identify where the funds and have you approve those. So eventually come back here.
All right, Amanda.
Nothing for tonight, but I am available for questions.
Ryan,
Mayor, City Council, I'll just open it up with any questions you might have.
any questions for Ryan? Thanks for your feedback again tonight. Chief Peterson.
Mayor and City Council members, no updates from me unless you have any questions.
Nobody?
No updates.
And no Kevin.
Mayor, City Council, no updates unless you have any questions.
All right. Come back for council updates. We'll start with Councilmember Roberts.
I was able to attend my first planning commission meeting since being appointed as liaison, and so now that I know my Wednesdays are going to be for that, I have my schedule free to be able to attend more of those.
Excellent. Councilmember Valento.
Nothing for me.
Councilmember Husnick.
Yeah, I attended the Vietnam Veteran Program that occurred yesterday at the Legion. It was well attended. It had been there, and they always have really good speakers, and In fact, there's one veteran there that just, who had served in Vietnam, just came home from Vietnam because he had went there on a trip and talked about the differences now and that kind of thing. But it was pretty interesting. And one of the reasons I brought this whole thing up is just a really loud shout out to Diane Finneman for her hours and hours and hours of work to get this thing going. And she's been doing this for several years, and it's always been a great program. So that's all I have for tonight. Thanks.
Along with Abby, I attended the event with Congressman Stauber. It was fun to tour Team Vantage and Norhart, and the good work they're doing. It's great to have them as members of the community.
Excellent. Very good. I am still digging out from being on vacation. Thankfully, I think I've shaken the jet lag finally. So no update for me this evening, and appreciate everyone's hard work while I was gone, and it's great to escape for a couple of weeks. So thank you for that opportunity. That being the end of our planned agenda this evening, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye. Aye. Oppose, and we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.